Hello, my fellow readers. My name is Greg, and this is Ghost Readers in the Sky, and I'm here with my weekly roundup of what I read during the third week of August 2025. I'll start with what I finished this week, and first is Waverley by Walter Scott. Walter Scott published this work in 1814. It's looking back to the Second Jacobite Rebellion. The big turning point of that was in 1745 at Culloden. And he subtitles the book 60 Years Hence. Walter Scott is known as the founder, the first big practitioner of historical fiction. And in fact, the Walter Scott Prize is given for the best work of new historical fiction. It has to be published in the previous calendar year, and it must take place at least 60 years before the publication date. And that's all to honor Walter Scott and how he started with Waverley. This is a book about a young Englishman who comes from a noble family, and it is suggested that he join the English army, the Redcoats, because he knows people who know people. He gets a commissioned rank. I believe they start him as a captain. And so he is sent from England up to Dundee in Scotland to join the Redcoats there, who are preparing for what they think is going to happen with the Jacobites. There's word that Prince Charles Edward is coming back from France, who is, the Scots see him as the rightful heir to the throne. The English do not. So Waverley, before he goes on to Dundee to meet his company, he goes to visit an old friend who lives in the lowlands of Scotland. Well, I guess we're moving up into the Highlands. He's in Perthshire, and it's a family friend who's a laird who has a home there and serves as the laird of this village, this area, these tenants. And Waverley goes to spend time with him, and while he's there, his host's cattle are stolen, or a number of them are stolen, by Scottish reivers, which is a common thing that happens, especially if you aren't paying the leave me alone money, the protection money to the clans. That money had been stopped, and so the clans came down. And so Waverley is part of the party that goes up into the Highlands to find the cattle and return them to his host. Of course, it's a long time before he gets back to his company, and there's a lot of infighting going on in the English political sphere between the Tories and the Whigs. And the Whigs are in power, and the people who are seen as sympathetic to the Tories, including Waverley's family, are having a lot of political difficulties, and they're using Edward as one of the pawns in that political war. So, Prince Charles Edward arrives, and the battles are fought, and it really does go through a pretty solid rendition of what those battles in the Second Jacobite Rebellion, what they looked like. I think this book is very well done. I really enjoyed it. It made sense to me. The premise was good. The way that this young English gentleman is introduced to the Highland clans and factions makes sense. The way he's responding to the politics in London. It all seems to be pretty tightly tied to everything I know about that time in history in Scotland. There's, of course, a love story, because why not? There was a scene where one of the characters dies, which actually was more moving than I expected it to be. I don't cry when I'm reading books very often, but when this particular character died, it was, even though it was not a surprise, it still kind of shook me up. When a great writer can do that, it's wonderful. I absolutely love that. I just thoroughly enjoyed this book. It's a great adventure. It's a great novel of historical fiction. It's set in a place that I'm quite interested in, a time that I'm quite interested in. The next thing I finished, well, I had been watching a lot of these Would You Rather booktube tags, and they are impossible solutions. One of them is, would you rather live on a deserted island with no people but all the books, or would you rather live in a world where you still had all of the people around you but no books? I think it's something very similar to that. But as people have been talking about that, I was thinking back to a short story I read by Anton Chekhov years ago called The Bet. Chekhov wrote this in 1889. I went back and revisited this short story because I just kept thinking about it every time someone would talk about the island with no people and all books. And The Bet has to do with that, someone who chooses to be locked away from society but can have all the books that he wants to read. Anyway, that's a short story that's anthologized a lot of places. I'm pretty sure that was one I read in high school, maybe in college, but it's one of those stories that stuck with me for these 40 some odd years. Chekhov packs a punch to a fairly short, very few pages. And finally, I'm part of the T.S. Eliot group read, and the last 2 weeks we have been looking at The Wasteland. So I finished that, actually read that a number of times. I listened to a number of different recordings. Wasteland is a fascinating poem that really, it strikes me intellectually a lot. I think about the dehumanization. This is, in many ways, this is a dystopian, apocalyptic world that T.S. Eliot is painting for us. A lot of dehumanization. Relationships just don't mean anything to anybody anymore. There's a lot of decay and destruction, particularly in the urban centers. This was written in 1922, so just after what we call the First World War. And there was a lot of questioning going on all throughout Europe, throughout America, throughout everybody who had been involved in this war of how did we get here and what do we do now? And I think Eliot really nails a lot of the aspects of that that wandering and the feeling of being lost in the debris. The other part that absolutely fascinates me is this is a fairly long poem, 5 parts, but there's not a lot of connection even within the individual parts. There are vignette, 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 all these small pieces of things that are going on. Some of them are a little longer than others, but most of them fairly short, which seem to have no relationship to each other. Some of them seem to be set in that world of London in 1922. Others could take place almost anywhere. There's a scene where 2 people, or maybe 3, are walking along a beach. That could be set anywhere from, well, as long as there have been people who could walk on beaches. So that covers a lot of ground. It could be set today and it would still make just as much sense. I was surprised that I did not feel much emotion in this poem. I found it very stimulating intellectually, and I found a lot of things that I was parsing in my own head that may or may not have been what Eliot intended, may or may not have been what critics say he intended. And I don't think poetry is supposed to be about just one thing and handed down by the elders from on high. I think you should read a poem and respond to it, and it's good to know the time frame, and some of the background of the poet is nice, but really the poem should stand on its own. And if I've made any interpretations that are not what Eliot intended, that's okay. Eliot is not the boss of me. The Wasteland, it's so well constructed, so well crafted. The language is beautiful. The structure is beautiful. The themes are quite interesting. But in the end, I didn't feel so much as I was thinking. It really engaged my brain, not so much my heart. I just kind of let old Tommy Eliot speak to me through the words on the page. All right, so what's going on? What's in progress? The T.S. Eliot group is finishing up with 4 quartets and Old Possum's Book of Practical Cats. I have not read either of those yet, so I will be going through both of those poems multiple times over this next week. I also got started on Alice in Wonderland by Lewis Carroll, written in 1865. Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. And the book is just so enjoyable. It's fairly short. I'll probably finish it up today or tomorrow, and I'll talk to you more about it next week. And I'm sure I'll be doing Through the Looking Glass fairly soon. I've never read Lewis Carroll other than Jabberwocky. I think that's the only thing I've actually read from Lewis Carroll. So I'm enjoying just diving into this book. I don't have anything specific planned for the rest of August. Some of you have heard about the reading event called Octember, where people are encouraged to read fiction and nonfiction about octopus and perhaps squids as well. I think I'm going to read The Octopus by Frank Norris, which is a novel that was written, I think, 1901, set in California, and it's really the wheat farmers against the railroad, and the railroad is the metaphor. The octopus is the metaphor used for the railroad, as that huge corporation sinks its tentacles into everything that has to do with wheat farming, hops farming, cattle ranching, sheep herding. The railroad just gets involved in everything. So that's my only plan for September, and we'll see if I do that, but I think that sounds like a good idea. So that's kind of sort of my plan. As always, thanks for listening. It's always nice to hear in the comments from people who have read these works and have comments and maybe even opposite opinions from mine. I always enjoy those discussions. I like it if you subscribe and like the video and all those things, but you do you. And I will come back next week with another roundup, closing out August. Till next time, my name is Greg, and this is Ghost Readers in the Sky.